You're watching MSNBC's continuing coverage of Hamas's attack on Israel. I'm Ayman Mohyeldin in New York. You're looking right there at live pictures of Gaza City, where retaliation strikes from Israel have continued into the night. The situation starting to unfold Saturday morning when the Palestinian militant group launched a deadly, unprecedented assault targeting the country's southern border. It was an attack that involved land, air, and sea components. According to the Israeli military, Hamas forces fired a barrage of more than 2,200 rockets from Gaza into Israel starting at around 6:30 a.m. local time. In the hours after the attack, the violence only continued to rage across the southern part of the country. Civilians caught in the crosshairs, the Israeli military saying that Hamas fighters had taken both military and non-military personnel hostage back into the Gaza Strip. But the exact number of those being held captive at this hour remains unknown. Israel quickly retaliated against Hamas for the attacks, with airstrikes lighting up the Gaza sky. And during a televised address just a short time ago, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu promised, quote, mighty vengeance for Hamas's attack against Israel. Netanyahu said the country will unleash its military strength in revenge for, quote, this black day. Earlier today, President Biden stressed his commitment to Israel and underscored the United States' long history of support for its ally.
I personally am going to remain in close contact with Prime Minister Netanyahu as this situation continues to develop. And let there be no mistake, the United States stands with the state of Israel, just as we have from the moment the United States became the first nation to recognize Israel 11 minutes after its founding 75 years ago.
Right now, here is where the situation stands as of this hour. Israeli officials say at least 200 of their citizens have been killed, more than 1,200 injured. In Gaza, at least 230 people are dead and another 1,600 are injured. This, according to Gaza's Ministry of Health. Joining me now are Dan DeLuce, NBC News national security and global affairs reporter, and Josh Letterman, NBC News foreign correspondent. I'll start with you, Dan. You know, on Saturday night, we obviously heard from the Israeli Prime Minister saying that they will turn all places that Hamas hides in and operates from into rubble. Residents of Gaza, he told them to leave now because we will operate forcefully. Do we have a sense, or does the American government have a sense of what the Israeli response will look like beyond just the words that we heard from the Israeli Prime Minister at this moment?
I think there's an expectation, Ayman, that this is going to be full-scale, large-scale, really a full-blown offensive, not some kind of limited police action that you might see in the past, right? But I don't think we know the full extent of what will happen, simply because this is such a fluid situation, and they were caught so much by surprise, as was the U.S. And so the question is whether the kinds of tactics that they've used before are going to work in this case and be as effective, especially when they have this really substantial hostage situation as well. Clearly Hamas has demonstrated it has more capability than I think the rest of the world fully understood. And we also don't know what Iran may do through its other proxies, Hezbollah and Lebanon, and how that affects Israelis' calculations.
Josh, I know that you've been following this story. You've obviously covered this story. There's a lot of quite remarkable international solidarity right now with Israel coming out of Europe. We heard that as well from the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. What more can you tell us on the European readout of what has happened right now in Israel?
Well, a lot of the European nations expressing solidarity with Israel, voicing their support for Israel's right to self-defense. The case of President Zelensky in Ukraine and in this part of Europe is really very interesting, because he's been drawing connections directly between what they're seeing in Israel and the experience his own country has faced with rockets and missiles falling near daily for more than a year and a half now, describing Ukraine Ukraine's fight against terrorism, as he describes it, as a part and parcel to what Israel is facing. We also heard him in an evening address tonight saying essentially, we all know what sponsor of terrorism around the world is likely behind this. That appeared to be a reference, of course, to Iran, which has not only fomented a lot of the militant groups that have attacked Israel historically, but also is accused of providing lethal drones to Russia to be used in Ukraine. But as we look across the globe, Ayman, we're hearing a lot of diplomatic efforts from nations not only to express support for Israel, but to get in touch with the Arab nations around the world that are perceived to have influence in the Middle East, and with the Palestinians, particularly with the Emiratis, with the Qataris, the Saudis, some of these groups that have now, these countries that have recognized Israel, others that have not yet, trying to get those countries to condemn what Hamas has brought about today.
Josh, there was a time, and certainly not too long ago, where Russia, as a member of the international quartet that obviously includes the United States, the United Nations, the EU, and the Russian Federation, were involved in the peace talks, were involved in trying to broker some kind of agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Russia right now ostracized by the international community, certainly the Western community of nations, as a result of its invasion of Ukraine. Is Russia at all a factor in what is happening there? You mentioned that at one point it certainly had relations, but it still does with countries like Syria, and in the region still has good relations with Egypt, despite it being ostracized from the international community.
Yeah, this is a really difficult one. So far, we haven't seen any signs that Russia is going to play a central role in resolving this conflict. On the one hand, Russia maintains close ties to countries like Syria, as you mentioned, really has played a major role in helping bring President Bashar Assad out of diplomatic isolation in the last several months. But Russia also maintains close ties with Israel. And in fact, Israel has stayed largely neutral in the war in Ukraine, in what is perceived to be partly because it is trying to maintain its relationship with Moscow. And so Russia clearly has some allegiances on various sides of this conflict, and it remains to be seen how and whether it's going to try to insert itself diplomatically to play either a productive or a counterproductive role in bringing an end to this violence.
Yeah, not to mention it still has relationships with Iran, and that also complicates everything even more. Iran being accused of being the backer of Hamas and being a proxy to both Hezbollah and Hamas and other militant groups in the region. And obviously, because of what is happening in Ukraine, and what has happened between Russia, it has relied heavily on Iran for some support on that front with Ukraine. Dan, do we have a sense of what intelligence capabilities the United States is prepared to share with Israel going forward?
I think that already, of course, the U.S. and Israel have a very close intelligence relationship. So there's nothing that we withhold from the Israelis, if you will. But in this situation, given the scale of this attack, Israel will probably be asking for a lot of technical help, certain types of satellite or other technical means that can help them respond militarily to this attack. Again, though, there is this question of why this wasn't anticipated. The other thing you'll hear, and we're already hearing this in Congress and elsewhere in U.S. officials, they will also be ready to provide Israel certain munitions, certain ammunition that they will need as the conflict proceeds, and everyone sort of seems to be bracing for something that is not going to be over soon. So that could mean munitions for the Iron Dome missile defense system, for example, and some other kind of very specific ammunition that Israel might be asking for in the coming weeks.
All right, Dan DeLuce, Josh Letterman, thank you to the both of you for starting us off this hour. Up next, we're going to get reaction from Israel's former ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren. Please stay with us. to the United States, Michael Herzog, said in a statement earlier today, quote, "This is war. We will fight to win and deter the terrorists from any future attacks." For more on Israel's response to today's attacks is former Israeli ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren. He was also a member of the Israeli Knesset, their parliament. Ambassador Oren, thank you so much for making time for us tonight. Just to pick up on the point that I was reading there from the current ambassador, Ambassador Herzog, what will victory look like for Israel going forward?
Israel will look like, the victory will look like, the restoration of peace and quiet along our borders and all of our borders. The return of our hostages have been taken. Punishing Hamas, certainly, to a great extent, so that this can never happen again. That's what victory would look like. It's not going to be a moment, with a flag atop a hill and declaring victory. It'll be a long struggle, a painful struggle. But Israel is determined to wage that struggle and determined to win.
I know this has been an extremely difficult day for Israel, and certainly it's still in the early stages of assessing how something like this happened. But as somebody who has served in the Israeli government and certainly been privy to a lot of intelligence and Israel's preparedness, are you shocked? Are you surprised by the tactical capabilities of Hamas to pull something like this off?
I'm surprised. I'm not shocked. I think Hamas has had a lot of help from its Iranian allies and has had for a long time. I am disappointed that we were not able to predict this in any serious way, caught off guard. And certainly when the smoke clears, there's going to be investigations. And in Israel, unlike many other countries, no one is above a responsibility. People will be held responsible if there was found that there were serious intelligence and tactical failures in this operation.
Why do you think Israel was not able to predict this? Israel's intelligence capabilities among the best in the world, if not the best, certainly the best in the region. But why do you think that Israel was not able to predict such an operation?
I don't know. I don't know if anybody knows right now. What we do know is that we have millions of Israelis sitting in bomb shelters, including my own family, my grandchildren. We have hundreds killed, thousands wounded, dozens held hostage. That is Israel's focus right now. It's not going to be finger pointing. There'll be time enough after this conflict ends. Right now, our focus is on returning our hostages, restoring safety to our families, to our communities, to our neighborhoods, and ensuring that Hamas will, or any other proxy of Iran, never does this again.
Can you share with us, since you brought up your family, can you share us what their condition is right now? What is the latest on what you're hearing on the ground inside Israel with the communities that at some point had been infiltrated by Hamas militants, and as we understand it, parts of those communities had been taken over, and there were ongoing gunfights between Israeli security forces and Hamas militants?
Well, that's what I understand as well. From my talking to my own children, my grandchildren, they are in bomb shelters. Sirens are going off over Tel Aviv. I live in southern Tel Aviv, and so sirens are going off there. There have been rockets fired, thousands of rockets fired at Israel so far, and school has been canceled. No one's going out, and we've been in this situation before with rocket fire. We have never been in a situation like this, where there are still active terrorists who are unaccounted for, who are apparently still operating within Israeli territory, holding hostages. And our army has been on a major call-up. All of my associates have been called up into uniform. And we are preparing for what could very well be a prolonged conflict. I'm hard-pressed to imagine that Hassan Nasrallah in Beirut, the head of Hezbollah, will sit quietly. I'm far from convinced that Hamas in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, will sit quietly, or even radical elements within the Israeli Arab population. So this could be a very prolonged conflict. And for many of us, the people who follow this conflict very closely, and I'm not alone in this, it was predictable. My own feeling was that Iran was very much frightened of the Saudi-Israeli peace treaty, which is being discussed, very much frightened by the prospect of a nuclearized Saudi Arabia, very much frightened by the prospect of return to Donald Trump to the presidency, and was looking for an opportunity to disrupt the Middle East, to destabilize it. Saw in Israel divided, frankly, deeply divided on political and juridical issues. saw the United States not wanting to be entangled again in a Middle Eastern conflict. And so Iran saw an opportunity. And this, I think, was evident to many people in Israel, myself included, and we were braced for precisely this type of outbreak.
So I think, you're using the word a prolonged confrontation. You've talked about the possibility of other fronts opening up, both internally and externally, on Israel. I just want to, if I can, specifically ask you about Iran. We know that Iran has supported Hamas, but to what extent do you believe, or do you know of, certainly maybe from your time in office, that Iran was directing and perhaps tactically involved in these types of attacks against Israel? How much of this is Iran backing Hamas, and how much of this do you believe Iran dictating and coordinating Hamas's behavior?
Excellent question. During my time in government, I had the task, I won't say it's a fortunate task, of actually being in charge of the Gaza situation. And I learned an immense amount about it, and found that, well, Hamas doesn't take its orders directly from Tehran. It is greatly supported financially and tactically by Tehran. About 95% of all the rockets being fired at Israel today are actually made in Iran, smuggled into Israel, into Gaza through the desert. The other 5% are engineered by Iran with the help of Iranian-trained Palestinian terrorist engineers. Iran also has a wholly owned and operated terrorist group known as Islamic Jihad in Gaza. That puts pressure on Hamas to undertake the type of operations that is undertaken today, this vicious terrorist attack. So Iran is deeply engaged, and Iran, as far as I can see, has every interest in destabilizing the Middle East to prevent the signing of an agreement between Saudi Arabia and Israel, or to preempt a situation in Washington which may not be to its liking.
Let me ask you about the current Israeli Prime Minister for a moment, who has made it a mission of his to reverse the approach towards peace in the region. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has boasted about how there was always this thinking that if Israel pursued peace first with the Palestinians and then with the broader Arab world, they would be able to achieve it. He made it a central point of his governance, I should say, government, to go out and make peace with the broader Arab world and then come back and make peace and try to make peace with the Palestinians. Do you believe that calculation was a mistake now that we're seeing this type of attack, that ignoring the Palestinian issue, that not addressing the fundamental root causes of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict have led to this moment?
Well, keep in mind that it wasn't just Benjamin Netanyahu who made that conclusion. It was also the Arab leaders who made that conclusion, that they weren't going to wait around for the Palestinians to agree to a peace offer, because the Palestinians held the world's record for being offered peace but turned it down. And we're going back to ancient history, but it's 1937, 1947, 2000, 2001, 2008. They were offered a two-state solution, turned it down, usually with violence. And it was Arab leaders who said, enough is enough. We want to move ahead and develop our countries, take advantage of Israeli technology, and open the region in that way. So it wasn't just Benjamin Netanyahu, and it's I think it's a large segment of the Israeli population. I'm not in government anymore. I don't have to represent anybody, but I will tell you that a large majority of Israelis would like to see some type of progress toward peace with the Palestinians. But precisely this type of vicious attack by Hamas shows Israelis that if we ever reached, say, a two-state solution where the Palestinians were in charge of a state on the West Bank and would fall to Hamas within days. We have a Palestinian leader, Mahmoud Abbas, who's in the 18th year of his 4-year term. He won't stand for re-election because he knows Hamas would win. So we had a Palestinian state. It becomes the same type of situation, a Hamas-stand type operation. You have a situation in Gaza, the existential for the state of Israel. I mentioned I live in South Tel Aviv. I see those areas. I see the outskirts of Hebron from my rear window. We would not be in rocket range. We'd be in rifle range. And so majority of Israelis are actually going to be more deeply convinced that that type of progress toward, that type of solution, which is not going to be a solution, it could be our dissolution, is not in Israel's interest. I do, however, believe, and this is the last point, that by making peace with Arab nations, I hope with Saudi Arabia soon, it will create an environment, conditions in which progress toward some type of solution, or at least a better management of our conflict with the Palestinians, could be achieved.
Let me ask you finally just about the return to status quo. I mean, the comparisons that have been made throughout the day is that this is Israel's 9/11, not just on the side of the intelligence failure, but on the fact that everything going forward from here on out in Israel will not be the same. Obviously, fundamental to that is the relationship that your country has with the Palestinians, the ongoing occupation in the West Bank, and those conditions. Some have said that the situation there is part of the reason why there is this ongoing conflict. And if you don't resolve that, you will never have a final peace agreement in the broader Arab world. Do you share that assessment? I mean, you have Israeli members of the government now, and certainly members of the coalition, calling for annexation of the West Bank, and some saying completely going into Gaza, invading it, and recreating another Nakba like in 1948.
The Hamas is not interested in the two-state solution. It's not interested in peace. Hamas is determined to destroy the state of Israel, to kill every one of us, to kill our families. These are the people who dragged civilians out of their cars today and shot them on the road. These are not people seeking peace. This is a vicious, medieval terrorist organization. And you could make a two-state solution tomorrow, and it wouldn't in any way impact Hamas. It would probably actually goad Hamas quickly. I've been around an awful long time. I was an advisor to the Rabin administration 30 years ago when we signed the Oslo Accords. Hamas launched a series of terrorist attacks and killed many, many Israelis, including a close member of my own family. It's the peace efforts that actually bring out the terror. And I think, once again, we're seeing a peace effort between Israel and Saudi Arabia has brought out this terror. That, along with other internal factors in Gaza, keep in mind Hamas has its own internal politics, and we've been following very closely the rising opposition to Hamas oppression within the Gaza Strip. This could be a response to that as well, too. But the point being is apples and oranges. It'd be great to be able to make some type of progress toward peace with the Palestinians. Anybody who thinks that that peace process could have averted what happened today, what's happening right now, is deluding himself.
All right, former Israeli ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren, sir, thank you so much for your time. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Coming up, some new reporting on how the U.S. plans to respond.
In this moment of tragedy, I want to say to them and to the world and to terrorists everywhere that the United States stands with Israel. We will not ever fail to have their back. We'll make sure that they have the help their citizens need and they can continue to defend themselves.
All right, so President Biden, they're flanked by Secretary of State Antony Blinken earlier today, making clear the U.S. is working in close contact with the Israeli government as the crisis there continues to unfold. Joining me now are Joel Rubin, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State under President Obama, and Hagar Shemali, former Director of Communications and spokesperson at the U.S. mission at the United Nations, also under President Obama. It's great to have both of you with us. Joel, I'll start with you. First of all, you heard perhaps in my previous segment there the former Israeli ambassador Michael Oren talking about this pivotal moment in Israel. Just give me your sense of where the situation goes from here and whether or not it fundamentally changes or upends the dynamics in the region.
Ayman, it's great to be with you and with Hagar. I've been in touch with my family and cousins in Israel, and I'll tell you, without a doubt, this is a different moment. Without a doubt, every family in Israel right now is touched by this, has been devastated by this. They're still in fear of the ability to walk out in the street, children not being able to go to school, not being able to go shop, cousins being called up, cousins of mine being called up to serve. So this is a moment that Israel has not experienced in decades. And what this is going to do is mobilize all of Israeli society. There is now a significant amount of support for whatever action the Israeli government takes regarding Hamas and Gaza. And so we're going to be looking at, and I think everybody is sensing, we're going to be looking at a very devastating assault on Gaza in the coming days. But first and foremost, of course, the Israelis are, as the ambassador mentioned, very concerned about those hostages, those who were stolen from their homes, from social events, taken into Gaza. And so it's a very complicated effort as well. But every single family in Israel right now is devastated and living in fear.
The language that was used by the former ambassador was prolonged. You're saying the situation on what Israel might launch will be devastating. What does that look like specifically? I mean, you certainly know from your time in government, we have been in this road before, not to this scale, but we have been in this road where Israel has carried out operations, wars inside Gaza. They've gone after Hamas's senior leaders. They've carried out ground incursions, ground invasions. What is going to fundamentally change this time militarily if Israel, as you say, does in fact exact a heavy military price?
Yeah, you know, Ayman, there are a couple of data points that stick out. I was in the Obama administration during the 2014 war, and at that time, about 5,000 rockets were sent into Israel over about 50 days. And now that many were sent just the span of 24 hours. So the devastation, the frequency, and the speed has accelerated significantly. And my fear is that we're also going to see a similar kind of dynamic coming from Israel. And that is going to be something that potentially we could see a reoccupation of certain parts of Gaza. Now, Israel has not wanted to occupy Gaza since it left. When Ariel Sharon evacuated in 2005, the Israelis don't want to be in Gaza. And in fact, they asked the Palestinians to govern Gaza, and then Hamas. It has been a spoiler. Remember, Hamas knocked out the Palestinian authorities, killed thousands, killed Palestinians, took over power there, and has launched attacks ever since. And so I fear that what we're going to see is more devastation and potentially a reoccupation of parts of Gaza, which, again, will lead to a significant increase in bloodshed and may pull other actors in. And that's really the real risk here as this continues to evolve.
Hagar, the situation that happened today, the words that some have used, unprovoked, but that kind of defies what the reality is on the ground. When you see the conditions that have been taking place in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem, in and around the Gaza Strip over the past several, not just year, but years, it's hard to look at this and say this happened in a vacuum.
Right. It's important to look at the factors that led up to this. And so in particular, as you noted, for years you've had really high tensions. You've absolutely had violence between Hamas and Israel. Of course, this is unprecedented, but this has come up very often, particularly around holidays and such. But tensions have been running especially high since last December, after Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu came into office and put together a quote, to quote President Biden, an extreme cabinet. And that cabinet is extreme, and they have taken very hardline, very tough, very provocative policies when it comes to things like pursuing raids in the West Bank and killing Palestinians, most of whom have been militants, but also civilians, by the way, pursuing raids at Al-Aqsa Mosque, allowing Jews to pray at Al-Aqsa Mosque, and violence that's happened there, especially during holidays, and also the expansion of settlements that have been expanded much further than I think we are in the U.S. government, when I was in the U.S. government, that we ever thought would happen. And so measures like that have created this foundation for fueling this tension, for making tensions very high. Now, all that said, none of that justifies the behavior on the part of Hamas. But the question here that's very important is that people need to start to wonder and to question whether or not the policies of the Netanyahu administration ultimately endanger Israeli citizens because of that.
So I brought in that question out to you, to you, Joel, and that is, do the policies need to change, not just of the Israeli government, not just of what is happening inside the West Bank, but across the region? Since the status quo is not producing a desired outcome, do we need to have a paradigm shift in terms of how we are looking at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Yeah, without a doubt, the reality is that what we have been doing, the collective we, has failed. I had a conversation today with a close friend in Washington, and we're talking about this and just thinking, this is not working. What has been happening, what the capitals are pursuing, is clearly failing. From an American national security perspective, our approach right now has hit the dead end. And so the question now, and to your point, the answer is, without a doubt, a deeper engagement on the Palestinian issue regarding peacemaking must take place. That agreements solely with individual countries, for example, while crucial, are not the answer alone to the core conflict. All that said, to Hagar's point, and I'll just reinforce this, this was an unprovoked assault. This was a terrorist attack. It's an ongoing terrorist attack. Hamas is no friend of the Palestinian people with the kind of hell that they're going to bring on the Palestinians in Gaza, the way that they've treated the Palestinian Authority in killing and kicking out the Palestinian Authority from Gaza. Without a doubt, Hamas is the primary culprit of the violence right now. But I will say it again, that we have got to figure out a different approach to dealing with the Palestinian issue. It has to go broader. It has failed up to this point. And without a doubt, we're going to see more violence. And I hope, and as a cousin of mine in Israel said, a religious cousin of mine said, we hope that maybe this will bring a different approach and a different way forward, because these devastating moments really are ones where we should look inward and try to decide, can we do things differently? But right now, I'm very concerned about how much more violence we're going to see in the days ahead.
All right, Joel, Hagar, please stay with me. I'm going to squeeze in a quick break. I'll continue the conversation with both of you on the other side. Just stay with us. All right, let's continue our conversation with Joel and Hagar. Hagar, let me get your thoughts on what we were discussing beforehand, which is the kind of political and moral failure, if you will, of how we have dealt with the collective we, the European Union, the United States, the international community, in solving this particular conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, ending the occupation, trying to bring about a two-state solution, as has been the stated objective of both the United States and Israel and the broader Arab world for the better part of 30 years since the Oslo Accords. It's not just an intelligence failure that we're looking with today. This is a culmination of a diplomatic and political failure that goes back years.
Of course. I mean, it goes back decades. You know, Ayman, I'm sure you remember there was a time period 20 years ago, only maybe 30 years ago, where Middle East my counterparts in the Middle East, when I worked in the U.S. government, used to say that in order to solve all the problems of the Middle East, that you just needed to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I genuinely believed that at that time. Now, this was before the Arab Spring. This was before Iran was as entrenched in support for terrorism as it is now. So things have changed since then, of course. But that said, it has fallen to the wayside. And I was at the White House from 2010 to the end of 2012, and I remember very well when the Obama administration pushed very hard to achieve some kind of peace deal and to negotiate, and it fell apart. And to be honest with you, since then, it doesn't really feel like there's ever really been a very serious concerted effort, and there are many reasons for it. And it falls on both sides. It's the Palestinians. The Palestinian leadership is weak, is corrupt, is feckless, doesn't have control over Hamas anyway. And the Israeli leadership, certainly the majority of that time period has been under Netanyahu, has been extremely difficult, extremely stubborn. And obviously pursues policies that are extremely hardline, tough, and provocative. And so the U.S. is always kind of caught in the middle. And so it's been a very difficult, complicated issue. I think that the value you see in the deals that have been made with the Gulf is that, on one hand, you see different incentives leading those deals. So in a lot of it, it's been security cooperation or economic incentives, trade, technology, things of that kind. And that is a lesson to deploy for future negotiations with the Palestinians. I think that, the Saudis say that the reason that a deal hasn't been made yet between them and Israel is because they want to see improvement on the Palestinian front. Now, I think that those talks will be postponed. But that said, that's also valuable to have leaders in the Gulf, and Saudi Arabia is the hegemon of the Middle East, really, if we're going to be honest. I think it's valuable for them to push that agenda. So I think that, with all of this said, yes, it has not been prioritized. It needs to be prioritized. But at the same time, there have been all these reasons why it has been so difficult to achieve it and why the attention has moved elsewhere.
Joel, final thought to you very quickly, though I apologize. I know this can go on for a while, but with this escalation, with this particular chapter, is this the end of the two-state solution? You have right-wing Israeli ministers calling for the annexation of the West Bank even before this happened, and you have today members of the parliamentary bloc that is leading this government calling for a Nakba, or a catastrophe, to be carried out. We already see the Israeli government cutting off electricity, announcing they're not going to deliver any more goods or supplies into the besieged territory. It's a situation that's only going to get more dire and worse.
Yeah, Ayman, there is no military solution to this conflict. Let's put that on the table, full stop. No military solution to this conflict. And the only practical one is a two-state solution. And regardless of how this unfolds, and it will be very hard in the coming days, and there will be devastation, there is still only one way to ensure security in the long run for the Palestinians and the Israelis, and that's the peace agreement based upon two states for two peoples. Getting there, though, is further apart and further away now than it ever has been. But those alternatives that you just described are not solutions. They're commitments to future terrorism, they're commitments to future devastation, they're commitments to future war. And so that's the big picture. Nobody has ever offered up a military solution to this because that is just absolutely infeasible and inhumane. And as we all know, just not going to ever bring peace to these people who deserve peace in this region of the world.
All right, Joel Rubin, Hagar Shamali, thank you to the both of you. I greatly appreciate it. Up next, we're going to take a wider look at the implications this attack could have on the region. Stay with us. 1 week can certainly make all the difference. Just 8 days ago, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan spoke at the Atlantic Festival, listing off a number of positive developments in the Middle East, claiming, quote, the region is quieter today than it has been in 2 decades. Well, today's attack changes that prognosis drastically, I would say. I'm joined now by Ray Takia, the Hasib Sabag Senior Fellow for Middle East Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations, and Lauren Whitney, Gottbrath World Editor for Axis. It's good to have both of you with us. Ray, I think maybe the central question everyone is asking, to what extent Iran may have been involved in this, both tactically and perhaps even with the capabilities that it has given Hamas over the past several years of being its major financier and backer. You're somebody who watches this very closely. What's your reading of how much of a fingerprint Iran has in this attack?
That remains difficult to ascertain at this point. What we do know is in the past year, and certainly in the past several months, there has been a great degree of Iranian coordination with all the rejections groups, Hamas, Hezbollah, and others. The rhetoric of the Iranian regime has been quite sharp in denunciation of the Saudi-Israeli impending agreement. And of course, there has always been a relationship between Iran and Hamas. I think it is even suggested it gives about $70 million of assistance to it in terms of missiles, munitions, and other things. Having said that, I think Iranians probably had a foreknowledge of this attack, but I'm not quite sure if they ordered it. I think Hamas is an independent organization and makes its own decisions, irrespective of that in-depth relationship that it has with Iran. But nevertheless, I think Iranians are both supportive of this measure. They probably knew it was coming, and they have been, as you mentioned, generous supporters of Hamas in all fronts, financial, military, political, and so forth.
Sure. Lauren, you know, we've been having this discussion against the backdrop of what everyone was expecting to be this historic breakthrough, a Saudi-Israel peace deal that would have changed the region. The former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Michael Oren, believed that was a motivating factor in Hamas carrying out this attack, to try to change that dynamic. Give me your thoughts on whether or not you see it that way, that Hamas would be interested in sabotaging that. They haven't done something like that with the Abraham Accords, but why would they do that now potentially with Saudi Arabia? And two, is this enough to derail the situation? One of the demands, as we understand it from the Saudis, for a comprehensive peace deal with Israel was there for Israel to make some kind of gesture or to offer something towards Palestinian statehood. It's unlikely that Israel would do that given the current climate.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of what those talks certainly will be postponed. Whether or not they end, I think, remains to be seen. It's going to be very, very hard for the Saudis in particular, under pressure from much of the Arab world that doesn't have relations with Israel, as well as other Muslim majority countries, to enter into a deal with Israel and not get anything for the Palestinians. So that's certainly something that, you know, Washington in particular will also be concerned about, because there was some momentum gaining for this quote unquote mega deal with Saudi. In terms of whether it was a motivating factor, for Hamas. I mean, they said as much in part of their statements that were coming out today. Whether it was the motivating factor, I'm not so sure. I think occupation itself probably was likely the big motivating factor. But that being said, they themselves sort of warned against sort of these normalization agreements that we've seen over the last few years. And it's certainly going to have an impact on the Saudi-U.S. talks that have been going on.
Ray, your thoughts on the psychological factor in this? I mean, I think for those of us who study history and the comparison to 1973 was that element of surprise in the Egypt-Syria attack against Israel changed the dynamic of the Middle East for years. Certainly at the time, the Saudi oil embargo changed America's calculation and its involvement in that war. How does this surprise attack change Israel's psychology about its deterrence capabilities, but also how it's perceived by its adversaries?
Well, first of all, this is a failure at great respect in terms of intelligence. By the way, also of American intelligence. The Israelis had access to communications of Hamas, as do Americans and others, and their inability to project this attack will be something that will be studied. Israelis will have their commissions to investigate how this intelligence failure came about. The difference between this episode and 1973 is when Egypt embarked on war in 1973, it did so in order to embark on peace subsequent to a successful military incursion. This is not what Hamas is seeking to do. It is seeking to further cement an aggressive posture toward Israel. It seeks to disrupt efforts toward peace that were ongoing, as was indicated by the last speaker. So this is very much an effort to prevent an emergence of a peace compact between Israel and its neighbors. Whether it succeed or not remains to be seen. So much of this depends on how the situation evolves, the level of casualties that are going to mount, and the nature of the situation. This particular episode can indeed get worse. At this point, at least, we have not seen the northern Israeli border being disrupted with the Hamas and the Hezbollah attack. So we're very much in the preliminary stages of this, I'm afraid.
All right, Ray, Takia, Lauren, Whitney, Gottbrath, thank you to the both of you. Please stick around. We have more breaking news at the top of the hour as we continue our extended coverage.